Welcome to You Can't Handle the Truth, where we dive into the real, raw truths about health, wellness, and self-growth. I am your real talk guru and your rebel healer, here to cut through the noise and dig deep into mental, physical, and spiritual health, uncovering the truths many aren't ready to confront. We're going to do that together. Hello and welcome back to You Can't Handle the Truth. My name is Natalie, and today we are diving into love. Love. Yes, love. Don't we love to be in love? Yes, we do. And at 40, this can be a really hard topic, right? Because we maybe have thought we were in love before, we've been divorced, maybe this is our first time. But here's the thing about love. Do you think love is enough? I'm going to read you a question from a fellow, one of our ladies over 40. And she asked this question. And I'm just going to jump into it because why beat around the bush? But today, I talk a lot about believing in spirituality, but I don't talk about it a lot in my videos. But today I'm going to actually focus on that because of this topic, because it's really important. Spirituality is about growth, right? And spiritually we can in evolving and becoming our best selves. It can be about religion. Sometimes for some people it's about religion, which is also going to be an important factor when you're making a decision to get married, right? And so our sister here asks about, do you think love is enough when you're going to get married? And well, let's read her whole question and let's see what you think, and I'll tell you what I think about this, right? Because the interesting about love is that a lot of times, depending on how long you've been together, for the first 2 years, we think and feel that love is that lovey-dovey feeling that we have, that connection, always being together. And a lot of people look at that as love. But in my mind's eye, love is more than just a feeling. It's a doing. What are you willing to do for the other person, even when they are on your last nerve? I wonder what my husband's willing to do for me when I'm on his last nerve. I'm sure he'll do a lot. But it's true, because people are different. People are, people change over time. And when you're with someone and you love them, you start to find out what you will do that maybe you wouldn't otherwise do for anyone else. Things that, is the love unconditional? Is it conditional? There's a lot of things, and your growth has a lot to do with that. So let's read what she says. Let's read her question, and then we're going to get into it, right? So she says, my boyfriend 34 male and I 30. This is in the over 40, but I think this is a good question. So I'm going to go ahead and go along with this. I didn't read the age before I started, but I think it's a good question, because I think even in our 40s, this is when we're starting to realize that there's a shift in how we think and feel about love, right? And in your 30s, if you're in your 30s, mid 30s, getting ready to go into your 40s, this is a good time to start. This is a good question to start thinking about. But anyway, I digress. Let me keep talking. Let me read her question. So, my boyfriend and I are getting more serious and talking about moving in together soon. But I have some compatibility and lifestyle concerns. His house being run down and needs lots of work. Him not having as much savings, money to travel or do things that I want to do, in his general lifestyle, waking up later, less organized, a bit chaotic. The house is big for me because he doesn't want to move, but it's hard. It's just hard but it's just a hard house to picture having children in. So I guess his house is not big enough for her if she wants to have children. We're pretty madly in love, but I'm worried these issues are not really resolvable in the short term, and I worry about wasting time on the potential of a situation. Edit. Um so anyway, so after she got responses, she wrote her edits. So here's the thing. I don't know how long she's been with him. She just says we're getting more serious and thinking about getting married soon. So I don't know how long they've been together. But my thing is, for the first 2 years, you're just getting ready to know each other. And for some, this can go quicker if you can bypass some of these things if you that time, and it can happen in a shorter time if you ask the right questions, right? If you understand what you're getting into. And it's really interesting that she's asking this now after she's thinking about getting married. But these are questions. I'm going to give you a list of questions that you should be asking and vetting someone for before you even date them. Because it gets harder, right? Like, you fall in love with someone, you love them, you've had, maybe you've been intimate with them, and then now you're just like, oh, we're not compatible. Like, this is a this is a this is a deal breaker for me, right? Like, maybe the house for her is a deal breaker, and maybe he doesn't ever want to move. He's just happy being in that house, and he's like, if I have kids, I can raise my kids in this house, and that's it, right? I'm good. And he's not going to budge on that, right? So really important, I think, when you're going to date someone. If you're just dating to just go out, have a good time, one thing, right? And even then, be careful, because you never know if you're going to fall in love, right? So wouldn't it be easier to just be able to vet that person ahead of time and know, are you compatible? So what are your deal breakers? What is it that you're looking for in a person? I think that's the first question you should be asking yourself, right? And so before you even jump in bed with that person, before you even get intimate, and keep going on dates and getting more and more intimate, because the longer you date each other, the more intimate it does get. Like, you find out more about each other, you maybe have a good time together, and if your whole relationship is around having a good time and going out and doing all these fun things, that's great. That might feel like you're in love, but what happens when all the fun stuff stops? And when I say it doesn't have to stop, but when it's not the same, because once you get married and you're in a household with someone, things change. Like, you're not on dates every day. You have kids, you have other responsibilities. They have responsibilities. You have to take care of things. You're working, and it's not like that anticipation. That anticipation is not there. That, oh my gosh, I'm gonna see that person after like 2 weeks, right? Like, you see each other every day, and maybe you enjoy each other's company, obviously, hopefully, if you live together, but still it can be very unnerving to find out that you're going to move in with someone. You're thinking, oh, I'm going to get married. Now you move it in, and you're like, this is not compatible, because they're not willing to budge on certain things that I want. So why not find out ahead of time? So like I said, first thing I would do is write down the deal breakers. What are your deal breakers? So, because marriage is a lifelong commitment, so you gotta have ahead of time, before you get too intimate, that deep, honest conversation before you say I do. Because once you say I do, there's a lot of that goes into undoing. Especially when you have kids. If you have kids after you get married, when you have children involved, it gets very, very complicated, right? Divorce is complicated. So, and this can help build a strong foundation, because you may have some things that you want that he's like, oh yeah, I got you on that, right? Or you're like, yeah, I got you on that. I understand. I mean, for example, my husband and I talked about how for him, he wanted for him, this would probably be a deal breaker. He was like, I want to live in a house where I have property and I can have farm animals, right? And so, and you have to take what the person's telling you at face value too, and not just say yes, because you're going to be held accountable to that once you're with the person, because we got a place, we got a house, and he wanted farm animals, right? Like, so if I was like, oh, you know what, I don't really think so, well, that's not fair to do that with to your partner. And so you want to be careful that what you are agreeing to, if you're agreeing to something and you're saying, oh, you know what, that's not a deal breaker for you, that it's really not a deal breaker, right? So it would be like someone saying, I want, like me, the woman saying, not me, the woman saying, I want kids, and the guy saying, I don't want any kids. And you're like, we're so in love, let's get married. And then after you get married, you're trying to convince him to have children. And he's like, no, I don't want any children. Right? Like, it's not fair to you, and it's not fair to him. And vice versa, the same thing. If he wanted kids and you didn't want kids, and now he's like pressuring you to have kids after you get married, after he said it was okay, that he got it, that you didn't want any kids, and he was going to be okay with that, right? So we need to be very clear and very honest in those discussions ahead of time. So I'm going to give you like 10 essential questions to dive into that I think are very pertinent to get answered for yourself and for the other person, right? And in her case, I would say she needs to ask these questions. Why does she want to get married? Are you doing this because you truly love and complement each other? Or is it due to some societal family pressure? Because some families, after you get to a certain age, you're especially for women, the parents are like, are you going to be an old maid? Are you ever getting married? And maybe you don't want to, you truly don't want to get married, but you feel the pressure to get married. Or maybe they're asking about grandkids, right? And I just saw a question about that too. The parents are asking, oh, well, are we going to have grandkids? And we could talk about that in another one, but I don't think anyone really, I mean, you might, grandparents might ask once about grandkids, but you know what? If you ask once, it's more than enough, right? Because everyone has a right to not have to discuss whether or not they want kids with everyone, but that's something you need to discuss with the person you're going to marry, because one person may want and the other person may not want, and that could be a deal breaker, right? Right. Okay. So let's move on. So you need to understand if there's really love there, and you're like, okay. And maybe at the beginning you're not sure, maybe there's chemistry, right? Because you just met each other. There's a lot of chemistry, but you don't know if there's love yet, right? Because you haven't had an exchange. You haven't seen what the person's willing to do for you. You haven't really seen what you're willing to do for that person yet, but you know that there's chemistry. So that's a good start. That's definitely a good start to have good chemistry. But this is a good time also to have this conversation before the chemistry gets too wild, because especially, does the person even want to get married? Maybe in her case, maybe he just wants to move in and he's good with that and he doesn't even want to get married. Then what? You've moved in with him and you're thinking, okay, because we're moving in, we're getting married. And he's like, no, we're not. No, that's not what I want. So now you maybe sit around, or when I say sit around, you engage in this and you give your all into this relationship, only to find out this person does not want marriage and this is a deal breaker for you. And so now you're not in that relationship anymore, right? After 2 years, where you could have moved on and posed the question to the next person, right? That you have chemistry with. Definitely want chemistry there. So the next thing is, you want to know how do you handle conflict? Do we fight fair? That's going to be, is it toxic? You want to know, Because in those early days, you don't know, everybody's doing everything to please everybody, right? Because you're trying to reel them in, right? You're reeling them in with the love bombing, the this, the that, and all the things that you want to do for somebody that you have chemistry with. But are you willing to compromise, right? If you're having an argument with someone and they say, you know what, I don't want to talk about this, but we can talk about it later. Does that sound fair? I mean, that sounds fair to me. Or is the person going to say, I don't want to talk about this, and they don't ever want to talk about it again? Well, then that leaves resolved issues, right? So now you want to know if that person's willing to compromise, listen, and grow together, right? And that doesn't mean that they have to listen right now. They may be like, hey, I need a break right now, but we can come back to this conversation later. Are you willing to do that? That's a compromise. You can't, because you can't force somebody else to talk to you either. So are we going to be toxic when you get mad? Are you yelling? Are you screaming? How do you react? What is your reaction? What have you done in the past? Like, how did you react when you were mad at your parents? What did you do? Like things like that, because that will tell you a lot, right? If they're like, yeah, I was mad at my mom or my dad, and then I went outside and I punched the car and I threw a chair across the room, that might be a deal breaker. I don't know. Unless you know I'm just saying, if they're telling you that that's what it is, and that's what it is, and that's as nice as they could be and as much chemistry as you can have with that person, if you're not willing to have them throwing chairs in your house, that may be a deal breaker. All right. What are our financial goals and habits? Like, this is important because she's like, hey, he doesn't care about saving money. Well, he doesn't have any kids, right? But if he wants kids, he might want to start planning about saving, right? And so how many of us have been in those relationships, right? Where nobody thought about the money, nobody thought about that. And then you got with somebody and you find out that their financial goals were not yours. Believe me, I can tell you that will become a deal breaker. Because once you're settled in a relationship and there's love, part of your growth together is your spiritual growth. And I'm not talking about religious growth. It's about what you want in life. It's all those things. How are you going to accomplish your goals? How are you going to reach your purpose? What things are part of your purpose? It's not just like, maybe it's buying that house. Maybe it's taking that vacation. Maybe it's being able to help your mom or your parents when they get older. Maybe you're someone who's like, hey, when my mom gets older, I need to be able to take care of her. So what are your habits? Does this person spend all their money paycheck to paycheck and they're not worried about savings? How are you going to handle finances? Are you somebody that would want to, are they somebody that would want to have separate finances or finances together? Is that a deal breaker for him? Is that a deal breaker for you? Does it work better? And everybody's different. Some people handle their finances together. But if you're handling your finances together, right? Let's say you're making the money or he's making the money and you're spending all the money. And then he's thinking, I'm going to save to get like some things. And every time he goes to the bank account, you've drained it or he's drained the account. That's a deal breaker, right? So you need to understand that when it comes to saving, how are you going to do things? I personally am not a 50-50 kind of person. I am like 100-100 kind of person where everybody puts in everything and we do it together, right? And sometimes I'm doing more, sometimes he's doing more, sometimes it just depends. It depends on where we are in life, but are the goals aligned? Are we helping each other reach those goals that we've talked about? Do we have goals? What are they? Do we want children? I said that already. If so, how do you want to raise your children? And now this is where religion may come in, right? Like, so are you the same religion? Are you okay with raising your children in that religion, whatever that is, may be for you, whether you're Baptist, Protestant, you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever your faith is, you want to know if, because for some people in some religions, even though they may date outside of their religion, it may be imperative that you convert to their religion, that the children be so that the children be raised in their religion. So these things need to be discussed. So, what was her question? Is love enough? No, it's not. It's really not. You have to be compatible on different levels. So next, what role does spirituality or religion play in your life? I just talked about that. How you're going to raise your kids in terms of faith, spirituality. What values do you have for your kids? Are you gonna do when you're raising your kids, do you want to come and have dinner together? Um, are your kids are you going to keep your kids active? How are each of you going to participate in raising the children? There's so many situations where I see, and the one parent has to do all the disciplining, right? And but you need both parents. So where is that going to fall in? How's that going to work? Are you using corporal punishment? Is that like, some people are raised that way. They're getting their butts beat like every right left turn that they make. There's a belt being pulled, right? Like, is that, are you okay with that? And I'm not saying, I know that, in certain, like, physically hitting your kids is illegal, but I'm sure it happens in a lot of instances. So you need to be speaking to that person to understand how they plan on aligning with you to raise your kids. You know, if you're not ruling by the rod and the other person is, that could lead to a meltdown of the relationship very quickly. What are the expectations for household roles and responsibilities? Who handles what? Chores, cooking, cleaning, managing bills. Honestly, it's this is something we talk about. Culturally, there may be some roles, depending on the culture, that are mostly women do it or mostly men do it, and or but I think it should still be discussed, because there's some responsibilities that maybe as the other partner, as the woman in the relationship, that maybe you can pick up if the guy pays the bill. Is it too much? Maybe, do I need to check in with you to see how you're doing? How you're handling that? Do you check in with me to see how I'm doing? Do I need help with the laundry or the kitchen? And the thing is that, and if you don't check in, even if you don't check in because everybody's busy, if I ask you, is that going to help at some point? Is that going to be an issue? Because a lot of times we go on assumptions that everybody's going to help, and it leads to a lot of resentment. And that's how they say that love and hate are closely related. But when you start to bring resentment about things that are happening in a household, in a relationship, that's a surefire way to become disconnected. As connected as you think you are and feel before you get married is as disconnected that you can become in your relationship. So it's very important to do like check-ins, to see, like, hey, how are you doing with all your chores? And it may be things that you're for example, I'm going to give you an example for housekeeping, right? You may be, as a woman in your culture, you may be the one responsible for housekeeping, right? Keeping the house clean, whatever. But does that mean that you have to do it? You might be able to hire somebody to help you clean, but it's still your responsibility to do that, right? The man doesn't want to come in, have to make the phone call, hire somebody, bring somebody in. So, there's ways to work things out, because we know that everybody's busy. But still, who's going to be responsible for handling what? My husband handles all the outside stuff, and we talk about that so often, and sometimes he's like, I do everything outside. And I go, I know. Well, but and And he does it well. You know what? He does it well. So, and I really appreciate him for that. And we have to remember also in the relationships, and this is just a sidebar in this conversation, is to be grateful for each other for the things that we are doing. But that goes down to back to how do we handle conflict, right? You handle conflict with gratitude. That's how you handle conflict. So anyway, how are you gonna keep? I love this. How are you gonna keep your relationship strong over time? What are you gonna do to keep the romance alive, right? And a lot of this goes back to spirituality. It goes back to self care. Spirituality is about growth, self care, becoming. How are you both taking care of yourself so that you can take care of each other, right? How are you going to prioritize quality time? Are you going to do date nights? What does date night look like for you, right? Date night for one person might look different than date night for someone else. Date night might look like you're cuddling on the couch and we're like, we're going to watch this movie tonight. That's what we're doing, right? With a glass of wine or whatever, or a glass of hot chocolate if you don't drink. But, or it could look like, you know what, we're going to get a babysitter. We're going to get out of the house for a couple hours. We're going to go have dinner and just go roam through the store and just like go take a breather, right? And how are each of you going to get your own time? Because part of keeping the relationship strong over time is the intimacy, right? But to have intimacy, you need to have your own separate time, because you need time to miss each other. And when you have time to miss each other with your own things that you're doing, then when you come together, it's a little bit hotter and steamier if you've done all the things and you've had all the conversations. So yes. And number 10 is, what do we do if things get tough? Aha. Are we running? Are we a runner? Do we shut down? Are we open to counseling, therapy? How do we handle the stress and external pressures that come in? How do we handle other people that want to come in and give their opinion about our relationships? Do we even allow it? How do we protect each other in a relationship? I was listening to a service the other day, and they said that when you get married, you leave your parents for a reason. I don't remember the exact section of the Bible where it's at. Like I couldn't tell you, but it's pretty amazing that when you're supposed to leave like your parents and cling to your wife. So at that point, when you cling to your wife and your wife clings to you, your family's supposed to be out of it. So do you go running back to your family or your mom every time that something happens between you? Because that could be a problem, because your family is always going to take your side. And even if the other person does something, your husband does something, and they go back and they're like, okay, like, they see you guys get back together, they're always going to hold a little grudge against him, especially if it's something severe. So do you go to therapy instead? How do you handle this, right? Not allowing family members to come in and speak in any kind of way to your spouse is very important. It's very important for your relationship, because these are breaches in your trust with each other when you allow that to happen. And is that a deal breaker? So these conversations, ladies and gentlemen, should be addressed before marriage. And I think some of these should be addressed at the beginning of the relationship, before all the hoopla and going out and getting intimate with each other, because it just gets harder to be like that close and intimate with somebody and then find out like, oh, it's a letdown. We have deal breakers. It's not gonna work. I have some things I want that you don't want. I have some things you want. You have some things you want that I don't want. And so and spirituality and growth, right? Like if I am someone that's growth minded, if you are someone that's growth minded and the other person is someone that's not growth minded, is that a deal breaker for you too? Because how is that going to affect things, right? When you're moving along and you're like, hey, like we're doing this and doing that, and the other person's like, yeah, I'm good. And they could be. The other person could be good, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm saying is that maybe then there's a compatibility issue at that point because um, whether you both share the same beliefs or come from the same background, it's important to discuss how this will impact your marriage and your children and your daily life together. Because once you're in the household together, we all have things that beliefs and things that we bring in from our separate families, right? And things that we bring in from other ideologies that we've picked up along the way. So it's really important to discuss those and to discuss what compromises that we are willing to make and how we're dealing willing to deal with conflict. All right? So if you enjoyed this today, drop me a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and let me know how you've dealt with this in the past, or if you're dealing with this situation, how you're planning to deal with it. Because I think it's something that's really important that because once you start to tap into your spiritual side, your growth, right? Your intuition and the things that you want in life, you want someone in your life that you can share that with. Because even if you have kids, at some point there will be a disconnect that happens. Once the kids are grown and you no longer have anything in common, if you haven't discussed this and you haven't been growing together, what happens? Many people get divorced at the end when the kids are getting ready to leave the house. That's when everybody's separating, right? Why? Because those conversations didn't happen at the beginning and along the way. This is not a one-time conversation. This is a conversation at the beginning to find out if you even get married, and then it's a continuous conversation to do check-ins to see where everyone's at along the way. Not to just wake up one day and go like, I don't know who that person is next to me. That's not the person I married. Because we will all change and evolve over the years. All right? So thank you for joining me on You Can't Handle the Truth. And I will see you in the next episode. Drop a comment down below and let me know your thoughts.